To go deeper, we have the last keynote panel for the day, and thank you for your resilience to still have your attention going on a Friday afternoon / evening. So get us started on that. We have a really amazing person who has been leading this initiative with the Asian Development Bank. Allow me to welcome Bruno Carrasco, Director General, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the Asian Development Bank.
All right, a very, very good afternoon. I'm delighted to see still such a large crowd. It's been really fascinating hearing all of the insights, all the buzz that has been generated over the course of the day. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about nature-based solutions and focusing on the finance side of things. Just to start, I wanted to say that basically we are in the business at the Asian Development Bank, as the region's development bank, we're in the business of solving complex challenges together. What do we do? Effectively, we have investment pipeline, that's investment projects that help the regions develop, including addressing some of the sustainability challenges. We do that funding through our own sources, through our own balance sheet, but also looking at funding from other partners. As part of our environment work, we have looked at the triple planetary crisis, and that focuses on the loss of nature and biodiversity, on looking at the implications of climate change, and for something that affects the region a lot, air pollution. Sir Nick Stern has talked about climate change as the mother of all externalities, and we can argue that nature and nature loss follows very closely after that. I'm going to walk you through a few slides, and I'll do that rather quickly so that we can have more of the discussion in the panel. So let me begin by saying that the nature challenge and the way forward is very, very critical to finding solutions. We've talked about global tipping points. If we look at global tipping points, Asia and the Pacific is very much at risk. And if we focus in on Southeast Asia, our region, we have a few data points to share with you. So in Southeast Asia, we've seen approximately 14% forest cover lost in the last 15 years, up to 80% of wetlands threatened with drainage through conversion to agriculture and development. We have more than 50 million species or birds of waddling birds in particular that are imperiled, and there are approximately 640 million people who live very close, or if not on the coastlines, and with sea rise, weather-enhanced measures, we're seeing a lot of efforts to try to contain that implication for those living on the coast. I want to next turn to climate and nature. And nature is challenged, biodiversity is challenged, but nature plays a fundamental role, as you have seen, in terms of building more resilience. So the forest wetlands, as you may know, and other land-based ecosystems can provide up to 20 to 30% of the mitigation required to ensure global warming stays and does not surpass 1.5 degrees. Oceans, very critical to this region, absorb 25% of all carbon dioxide. Financing needs, this is where we have huge gaps that we need to fill. Nature-based solutions require massive scaling of up to 674 billion estimated each year for that biodiversity loss and climate change by 2050. To avoid that biodiversity loss. Annual investments in nature-based solutions will need to be more than quadrupled by 2050 from the approximately 154 billion in 2022. I'm going to propose next a marriage of two things. One is the nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are great, but if we can't finance them, we won't be able to get very far. So the idea here is we have the challenges that I've mentioned. So there's lack of a scalable pipeline of NBS projects. That's a fundamental issue that we certainly have to try to address. There is lack of innovative finance. Often it's referred to sometimes as patient capital to scale up private capital flows. There is a risk perception on investing in natural capital, and so on and so forth. As far as the benefits are concerned, we need to find the means to protect biodiversity, reduce carbon given the sinks that we referred to before and others. We have inclusive growth and the impact on improved livelihoods that come together. So when we marry the two, we are doing something that brings the expertise of scientists, of nature experts, of environmentalists, with, on the other hand, the expertise of finance, structured finance people, people who know how to do financial engineering. And if we can combine those two, we can possibly get there. We live in a world of silos. We need to break those silos and bring them together. So we've created what we refer to as the Nature Solutions Finance Hub. And basically, it's looking at promoting projects that support innovative finance in conserving biodiversity and, of course, nature bonds and credits. I'm sorry that this doesn't click. Let me see if that clicks. Okay, there we go. How do we do this very quickly? We have 4 roles of this hub. One is an incubator. We help design these projects that I mentioned earlier, originate that work. We need to link up with innovative financing, and this is where I mentioned catalytic financing. We need to make sure that we're able to bring in that financing that makes the difference. We need to talk about de-risking of finance. We have many instruments, including guarantees, to help that de-risking process. We have blended finance. We're able to bring in carbon credits in many instances that we talked about. And, of course, bringing in the knowledge and capacity on how do we do so. And we do this, and we develop that vision that we call the NSFH vision. I know I'm running out of time. I'm just going to quickly take you through a quick example of one project that we've done, and this is the Sustainable Coastal Marine Fisheries Project in Cambodia. We've had situations where, as you can see on the issues, 40% decline in fish stocks due to overexploitation of coastal marine system, insufficient post-harvesting infrastructure, and lack of private investment. Through efforts, including the investments in seagrass, investments in wetlands, investment in reef recovery, investment in mangrove, we have been able to turn around and now bring much more of the livelihoods of many of those coastal folks that were dependent on fisheries and livelihoods. That's one lovely example. I will finish without going into it, but we have something called the bamboo projects. A lot of work has been presented at the Eco-Prosperity. This is a super exciting one. If we have a bit of time in the panel, I'd love to discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bruno. We'd obviously love to hear more from you, and that's why we have asked you to stay back for the panel as well to delve deeper into these topics. But you won't be the only one. We are giving you more tools and hands to discuss this further with you. So let me now invite on stage Jacqueline Dove, Managing Director, Global Head of Sustainable Finance Strategic Initiatives at the Standard Chartered Bank. And we also have Dermot O'Gorman, Chief Executive Officer of WWF Australia. It'll be moderated by Elaine Cheong, Board Trustee, WWF International, who will go deeper into the topic of innovative finance mechanisms.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for staying here. And today we heard a lot about the importance of nature and the role that it plays in buffering us from climate change. But if I put on my global CFO hat on, in the finance side, is I can tell you nature's value on a balance sheet is probably almost invisible. Hence, that is the heart of the challenge, which is nature is underfunded. Now, we heard today a lot that, there are lots of capital there, but really it's how do we tap that and also scale it. Bruno mentioned that we would need approximately $700 billion every year to really reverse the biodiversity decline. That sounds really huge, but really it's less than 1% of global GDP. And to really put that in perspective, we spend about the same amount of money on soda pops. And public funding really alone won't close the gap, and we will need private capital to step up. And the good news is that there are many innovative finance solutions now taking root, and nature-based solutions will alone deliver 37% of the emission reductions that we need by 2030. And it will also unlock 170 billion of ecosystem benefits. So nature isn't a charity case. Nature is an investable opportunity. So, but how do we actually move beyond all the various niche product pilots that we've talked about to really scale that in order for that to become in a mainstream, with the solutions to become mainstream, that will allow us to have financial returns that will match with restoration, environmental benefits, and community benefits. And that's what we're here to unpack today. And this is the final session of the day, and we appreciate everyone being here, but we hope that you will be energized and hopefully walk away with something that you can act on. So we heard earlier with Bruno's examples, very, very quickly, 2 examples of nature-based solutions and innovative finance. But I would like to now take that over to Dermot, who sits at, as an implementer, and looking at, how does it actually look like in action?
Good, thanks, Elaine. Good, well, this is the final session. It's about finance, and it's in Singapore, so I know you're all really interested in this one. WWF's approach over the last decade has really been to work at innovative financial solutions. We look at it as either financing the green or greening the finance. And I think those 2 sides of the coin are really important, and nature-based solutions, as we've heard from Bruno, play a really crucial part in that. But the example I want to talk a little bit about today goes to the risk profile and that challenge that you talked about, Bruno, about there's money, but there's not the actual bankable solutions that can be financed. And so off the back of the bushfires in Australia in 2020, we lost a lot of koala habitat. And so we looked at what would be required to restore the habitats in northern New South Wales. And it needed around $300 million to put close to 11,000 hectares back in. And we couldn't get the public capital or the philanthropic capital to that. So we looked at how we could produce something called koala-friendly carbon, which is a koala project powered by carbon credits. And there's 3 things I just wanted to stress about. The first one is the risk profile, is that in a world where there's an increasing blurring between the lines of profit and not-for-profit, as a not-for-profit, WWF has to take a lot more risk in trying to build these innovative solutions, because often the private sector investors will not take that risk to get it to the stage where it's a bankable solution. Once the bankable solution there, they all pile in, but until that stage, it's really hard. So we spent a lot of time from the beginning working on the integrity part of that. And so this koala-friendly carbon is registered with the Australian government as a high nature positive ACU, which is the Australian Carbon Credit Unit. The second one is we worked on the buyer as well. So we only sell to people that are signed up to SBT. They have to retire their credits. They're not allowed to have more than 10% of their business in fossil fuels and other high emission industries. And so the financial model was really around how we brought blended finance in. And rather than build a $300 million fund from the beginning, we started with an innovative pilot with partnerships between farmers, WWF, the government and philanthropy to bring the capital to test whether we could get a higher price for ACUs for planting in koala corridors out across New South Wales. And so after 3 years, we're now at a stage where we're about to spin out a joint venture that will then take some of the investment in the ACUs that goes back to farmers, some of the investment that goes to WWF and our joint venture partner, but this innovative idea of a revolving fund that takes money from the ACUs and puts it back into further planting, therefore accelerating the process.
Sounds like you've been matchmaking amongst different parties. And as a finance person, I often think about risk and how do we play to each other's strengths. And it scares me when I think WWF, and we're great implementers, we're there on the ground doing great things that can generate and protect nature. But when I say you're also there matchmaking the financing, so somehow I guess like we're not hearing each other because there's a lot of really credible finance people over here. So I would love to hear from Jacqueline in terms of how do you at Standard Chartered Bank, help facilitate some of these innovative finance solutions?
So firstly, I think it's really hard to be the last panel of the day, follow Paul's inspirational and the Greenwood Primary School, who were exceptional. And to build on what Dermot was just saying now, and a follow-on in theme from the previous panels, it's partnerships. When we look at what we have to do, we cannot do it on our own. As a financier, you are a facilitator, an enabler. And really, when we look at what we've committed to as an organization, it started with, as Paul was mentioning earlier, purpose right from the top of our organization. Leadership, so ensuring that we have the right position statements in place, the right frameworks to help guide our clients, identifying the right projects, but building on what Dermot had just said now, they need to be bankable projects. So the risk-return profile needs to be structured in a way that allows institutional investors to be able to invest and move their projects along. An example of this was a recent debt for nature swap issuance we had in the Bahamas, working with the government of Bahamas. It was a really interesting transaction when you think about structuring something innovative that's not been done before, where we partnered private credit with ourselves and an MDB to really bring through a structure that unlocked around 124 million US dollars for the conservation in the Bahamas for water conservation there. So I think, again, on the theme of how can we do more and sort of scale innovative structures, it's more that partnership and really trying to drive the collaboration between policy, private, public, and potentially, in some instances, a lot of work with insurance clients to see how we can further de-risk to get that return profile that's needed.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move to Bruno, because I also know that you see lots and lots and different type of innovative finance solutions. So whether it's biodiversity credits or debt for nature swap, lots and lots of different things. But what is it that will hook the investor? Like, why would I participate? Why is this better for me than traditional finance?
Okay, so very good question. We've heard from Dermot the matchmaking. We've heard from Jacqueline the work on partnerships. We need to bring all of that together. Excuse me. Just from a little bit going into the weeds in finance, from the ADB perspective, we are a AAA rated institution, so we can mobilize funds at a very competitive rate and pass it on to our member countries. We are categorized under a preferred creditor status, so if there is a credit event, we will be paid up first in the ranking. We have long-term financing, and that is very, very critical. A lot of people forget about this. Long-term financing allows us to anchor, particularly in nature-based solutions where it takes a little bit more time to get the returns. We then have things like blended finance, combining some grants that we can get to be able to bring down the cost of the lending. We have the whole idea of guarantees with first loss provisions that, again, provide protection for those who want to join us and partner with us in the financing side. But at the end of the day, I mean, we have the pipeline, which is critical. It is hard to design these projects, and so we offer it to countries, to partners to join with us. We have also a very important point, Elaine, and that is we have a taxonomy that exists, and we abide by those taxonomies, those standards. So a lot of times, against the risks of greenwashing and other things, with MDBs, we have a very important consideration in terms of credibility. So for all these factors, and including the partnerships with WWF, with BirdLife International, and many others, where we gain also a lot from you, I think this is how we match together and make that hook even more obvious for our partners. Thank you.
So I guess high integrity projects is key as well. Now, you guys are all looking at a pipeline of projects, and other speakers today also talked about that. And we always say, even for the Koala project, we started small. How do we build better integrity so we can fetch higher prices that benefits all? That's music to our ears, where everybody wants to incubate this and design it. But Dermot, there's a lot, like, how do we actually get these partnerships to move quickly? Because we want to trial things without necessarily reaching perfection before we implement. So what do you think is the most critical things that will allow us to shorten this or accelerate this funder and implementer partnership?
So I think that one of the fundamentals in Australia is a strong regulatory framework that allows certainty for investors. And so I think that that is a really fundamental, that all countries need to be investing in the right architecture to ensure we have that high integrity. Because as Paul said, the next bit is you have to start to build with a high integrity product. There's lots of people who can build a low integrity product and get to market very quickly, but in the end it comes back and you get the greenwashing claim. So I think investing up in early on high integrity, the principles and the standards that you want to put into the nature-based ACCUs is really important. And then I think I talked a little bit about this de-risking broker role, and I think that is one way that you can get faster. Building a minimum viable product requires you to take a lot of high-risk financial activities that you may or may not succeed. And so if you're got in philanthropic investors or government investors, you have to be able to take them on the journey to say, well, I'm going to do something super innovative, may work, may not work, but I'm going to test it quickly, see if it works, so that we can then start to scale. And so with Koala Friendly Carbon, we've been through 2 year-long sprints to get to the stage where now we're spinning it out as a separate joint venture, and we're moving to raise the initial fund that will bring together the 300 million over the next 11 years.
So I'm going to ask now Bruno, because you're looking at deploying $5 billion, and how do you assess whether a project is ready and has potential?
That is a fundamental question. We have a methodology that allows us to get involved upstream very early on, so we can shape that project from its beginnings in terms of concepts. We recognize that there is a lot of feasibility, pre-feasibility work. There's a lot of due diligence work that goes on. We're able in many instances to shape a little bit that discussion, that policy. If we're able to do that well and we keep to the standards that I mentioned earlier, we have a very strong ability to make that happen in a way that ensures integrity, ensures return on investment. Having said that, return on investment remains a big issue, of course. I think that we also recognize that we have both public and private sector under the same roof at ADB. So that in combination gives us also a lot of knowledge and ability to price in risks much better than if we were standing separately. And that these are parts of kind of that whole process.
So we all kind of know that nature-based solutions products doesn't really check off the traditional boxes. And it's not going to be a fast return. KPIs are going to be evolving as we define them. So, and we often don't have a common language, because on the side of impact, we talk about theory of change, but when we talk about finance, we talk about risk and returns. And so it's going to take courage for us to step up and, try this. So Jacqueline, how do you think we can make room for innovations without losing accountability? And what will courage look like?
Well, courage will look like everybody in this room standing up and making a difference and contributing, as I heard, being brave earlier on. I think from a Standard Chartered financier perspective, and you talk around accountability, again, it's not one organization that's accountable for delivering, but a partnership or a blended finance structure means whether it's policy makers within that discussion, whether it's the financiers, whether it's the public side, is really coming together. And I think to Dermot's point, these are not very fast projects. These are not things that you can accelerate exceptionally well because of the fact that the objectives is different from each parties. So really trying to identify where is the common ground, Where is the benefit? How do you share the risk, which then ultimately helps with the financing of it, as we had discussed? How do you de-risk the project so that it's bankable? If I think about the approach that Standard Chartered has taken in relation to these innovative ideas, and it touches a little bit on what Bruno was saying, it's implementing the right frameworks to facilitate the discussions with clients, with policymakers, with partners. It ensures that we're leading in way of upskilling, and I know that's come up a few times within the panel discussions, but really from the top-down seniority, with all the clients who are engaging, with government, with policy, really educating the impact. Again, and a lot of statistics have been shown today, but a loss of biodiversity has an economic impact, and the resilience for any economy to bounce back, for our clients and organizations to remain resilient, is diminished in relation to the impacts of climate change. So if you look at the economic impact, and again, quite often that's the discussion we have when it comes to the risk-return profile, is the one that we educate our clients and our internal colleagues about. We've also committed to, again, showing this leadership. We put in place a head of nature and biodiversity within the bank. We launched our first position statement on nature and our commitment to both halt and reduce the impacts of the loss of biodiversity. It's part of our environmental social risk management framework, and the due diligence that we carry out on the projects and with our clients adheres to that framework.
I really need to put on my reading glasses, which I don't have, so I'm going to try to read this question instead. Any thoughts around effective mobilization of capital on large scale to invest in innovative finance mechanisms, such as biodiversity credits and debt for nature swaps, that drive nature restoration and enhance climate resilience, while ensuring these investments deliver both economic returns and meaningful environmental impact? And I'm going to add a slice to that. So if I have billions of dollars and I want to protect the pandas, and I want to make a donation to WWF to protect the pandas, how will you change that around to turn it into an innovative finance solution, and what are the benefits of it? So I'm going to say to Dermot first is, would you take that money just right off, and I know the answer is yes, but change the answer to what it would take? And then looking at answering the question here is from a innovative finance solutions, how can we look at these instruments to build in the environmental benefits? First to you.
Good, okay. I'm going to start, of course I will take your money, but I will start with a key word there, which is benefits and to whom. Yeah? And so if I think about koala friendly carbon, one of the challenges that we lent into early was how do you distribute the benefits to the private landholders, the farmers who are planting out the 10, 11,000 hectares in a way that's fair. And so in piloting that, we had to work with the farmers. We also work with the Indigenous local rangers to involve them in the process to see how they would share in the benefits. You have to think about the benefits to koalas and then on return on investment to your investors. And so that who benefits on this, I think, is really important, because what we don't want to see are non-high integrity carbon markets where all the profits are sitting in the capital city and the benefits to rural communities are left over at the end of that equation. I think that's where the high integrity piece is. So I would take your money, but I'd ask you to give it with different risk profiles. Some of it as philanthropy, some of it as perhaps impact investing, and some of it about how we set up the type of partnerships that we've been talking about to get to a stage where we can deliver a high quality, high integrity carbon solution.
I'm glad that we think about all the various stakeholders. Now, over to the financiers, like how do you actually help, create these solutions that, keep the clarity on the who benefits?
Well, I think Dermot actually summarized it quite well. Again, it's understanding the benefit to all and ensuring that you can de-risk these projects to be bankable, because that then informs the risk-return profile and then allows us to, again, finance more. If I think about the and it's been spoken about quite a bit in the previous panels, but you think around all the innovative tools, yes, biodiversity credits, although probably a little bit farther off field than being viable now, but using the carbon markets, again, it's an area that you can monetize. Nature-based solutions, again, blended finance and working with multiple stakeholders to, again, de-risk projects. There are multiple tools of innovative ways that you can structure, again, outcome bonds, although long in gestation. Aligning the objectives for all parties involved, that is another tool that can be used to drive impact.
How about Bruno? Maybe you can also give that lens a system change lens. And what are the barriers to scale?
Yes, so the challenge is to find an income stream linked to nature, which is not obvious in most cases. I guess the easiest example is if you're a eco-hotel dependent on that pristine coastline, you're willing to put some money into preserving that coastline. So there's a little bit of income stream, that helps a lot, and that's where the structured finance people can come in and do a lot of good work. I think that basically unlocking other sources of funding is so critical. I was going to touch on bamboo, and I'm going to take this opportunity. So the typical bamboo business model was largely one, kind of for the construction material, for foundations, et cetera, and then two, for the wood and engineering of wood, so the whole furniture business. Suddenly, there was a strong realization that carbon credits could be a very important source of income. And particularly, there are varieties of bamboo that sequester much more carbon than kind of the forests that we already know. And that unlocked suddenly a surge of investment where we didn't have that before. And this is just one way of how we can uncover or unlock capital, identifying areas. Now, the more this world turns towards preserving natural capital, we're going to have to be pricing these things, the price of clean air, the price of a healthy ocean. And then as you start having to recognize and you'll have to pay for it, that's where those credits can continue. And if we do it right, can make a big difference. So that's just one example. Thank you.
So follow-up question. Bamboo has always been there, you say. So what was unlocked when they realized that it secretes more carbon? And what triggered that change of mindset that there's a solution that can be tied to that?
Right, so traditionally bamboo, again, the mindset was, it's a weed. It's a weed that grows fast. You don't have to maintain it pretty much. And for that matter, it was something that no one really cared about. I think the nature people came in and started realizing. In our project, we're looking at, so the standards, there are standards out there that recognize the amount of carbon sequestration, which then affects the pricing. And there are now cases where we need to set up a standard that recognizes that to be able to unlock further. If we don't have these partnerships, we often may forget about these things. And it can make a difference. And I would say even further, as we recognize that decarbonization pathway needs to be more aggressive, there's already, in some ways, the development of a futures market, even before that is developed. So getting access to those credits early on. That's just one example. I know we can't generalize, but a good example can go a long way. Thank you.
So in a way, I sit here and see that actually there are lots of tools there, but it's a recognition of how do you shape this in a different way and get different parties to the table to take on different elements of risk, and then making sure that we spread the wealth amongst different stakeholders as well. And if I kind of come back to the question, if I asked Dermot if you would take my millions to save the panda, I would say, don't just give me the money, but if I can create the solution, hopefully it can actually be sustainable, that ultimately it will fund itself. Would that be a correct lens?
Yes, but I would broaden down a little bit, because in order to build the initial minimal viable product, make sure that our assumptions were correct, it required partnership, and that partnership has been very diverse. So not just one donor. To think about that, we had the New South Wales government, we had HP, we had our offices in UK, Netherlands, US, helping and thinking about that. And so that knowledge and partnership is really important. Working with the local farmers, working with Indigenous partners, all of those people bring solutions to the table that you can build into that high integrity component. But I think the piece that is there, once you've built the model, like the bamboo model, people go, oh, I can take that model and take it somewhere else. And so this last week I was in Indonesia, and we were out in a project with my colleague Dito from WWF Indonesia, and we were like, why can't we do orangutan-friendly carbon and apply that model in the Indonesian? Different context, but perhaps things. So I think ideas snowball, and once you've got the financial model cracked, then that's one of the pathways to scale.
And I think the work that both Standard Chartered and ADB is wanting to do is to take these examples and hopefully replicate and scale them. Great. So we have limited time left, so it's always last is the call for action. What do you want to leave the audience with? And not all of us here are bankers or only work for WWF, but maybe we all can play a role in matchmaking a bit. So what do you think one thing you would urge the audience to do, commit to or action on in the next 6 months that could, for them to act with courage so that they can actually contribute to a nature positive journey for us?
I'm going to try to do it summarizing some of the great ideas that came over the course of the day. And it's a little bit high level, but I think you can see where it's coming from. I would say from, I think, Manuel's intervention, we need to build alliances. We need to be courageous. I think Paul mentioned that. We need to be able to break silos, and this is very typical in many agencies, that we don't work together so well. We need to think long-term, but take actions now, and take actions that are scalable. And with that, yes, we can.
You did such a good summary. So I'll try and do something a little bit different. I think it starts with education. So upskill yourself. Once you're educated, that I think Paul made the reference to the 10 centimeters between our ears, can drive great ideas. And then reaching out and executing. So speaking to partners who, again, can help with the innovative solutions, as Dermot was saying. Quite often, we work with our communities, our bankers, policyholders, and a lot of the markets that we're in, particularly around emerging markets. And it's our collective ideas that come up with those solutions. So be the change in yourself and upskill.
Good. I'm not sure I can add much technically to that, so I'm going to finish with one of my favorite quotes, which is, the world is full of amazing opportunities that are brilliantly disguised as unsolvable problems. And we're constantly, and the two words are brilliant and disguised as unsolvable. And so we're constantly told, can't do that, that won't work, if you do that, you'll fail. And I think that being able to turn not just a challenge into an opportunity, but to see, as Paul talked about, where the long term is going, where you need to take courage and go to that North Star. I think that's really what I'd love everyone to take away today.
Well, unfortunately, we're not finished yet. So now we're actually in the Q&A session, so I screwed up, sorry. But so we get a little bit more time for the wisdom, from learning from your wisdom. But I think coming to that point is, I forgot. But anyways, let me come to a question in the Q&A. what are the best ways to quantify ecosystem services so investor can see the benefit of a project? Anyone would like to take that?
Can you repeat it, Elaine?
What are the best ways to quantify ecosystem services so investor can see the benefit of a project? I guess, for example, the project will benefit smallholder farmers. Perhaps that is an ecosystem benefit. So what is the best way to quantify that?
I mean, I'll take a stab at this, but I think Dermot touched on it earlier in relation to understanding the benefit to all parties, both from a sort of nature positive perspective or a nature perspective, but also an economic perspective. So I think, again, when we think around, and I'm talking from a sort of an institutional investor perspective, you're going to want to see the risk-return profile in a way that you're willing to invest in that project. But it will be a number of sort of quantums, or that you would have to look at a number of factors when investing in that. So you'd have to play to everyone's objective or incentive for investing into that. I don't know, Dermot, if you... I was struggling to interpret that.
No, I think you're spot on, and I'm going to answer in a slightly different way. So I wear another hat. I'm the chairperson of a startup we've WWF started called OpenSC, and I'm not, technology does not solve everything, but I think that for the last 20 years we have struggled to verify the measurable benefits to communities or to nature, and so I do think that the technology that we have today, whether that's blockchain, AI, and the Internet of Things, provides that transparency and accountability that we've struggled with for the 20, 30, 40 years to go to scale. And so I think what I've learned through the work we've done with OpenSC is that you can move from, 3 years ago I was audited, I was audited in a paper audit, to in real time seeing what the ecosystem services or what the payments to small scale farmers are. And that's a bit of a game changer, I think. So taking that to scale, I think will take quite a few more years, but that ultra transparency in benefits starts to then be able to put a price on that in the market.
And I think that's an important opportunity of investment as well. When we think around the enablers of that transparency, the technology related to it, from a financing perspective, there's a lot of the solutions we look at as well, because it enables that.
Yeah, just from my side, there is a literature that looks at natural capital accounting, taking into account the ecosystem's compensation for the services that are provided. It's not an area that is well known, but that's the idea, to try to recognize that there are services that need to be remunerated, even though it doesn't come out naturally because those nature solutions are not priced. So this is kind of where some work is going.
And I think I'm going to add to that where, we always say what gets measured gets done, and but somehow when you try to figure out how to design the comprehensive measure, we will be sitting here for a long time. And one of the examples is that previously we used to pay our factory workers a bit more wages. And because we thought, okay, by paying people more, they can benefit the community, so they have more spending power. And then we realized that after we gave them a raise, it's like, but there are no additional spending power, because we realized the mafia who controls the rice raises the price, so the mafia will actually benefit from that. But then when we kind of then look at, how do we spread that a little bit, then we start selling rice to our factory workers. But then once the money gets funneled, then we realize it's not just a livelihood. Someone actually paid for the education, and that person went abroad and then bring back. It's so wide that it's really hard to just measure the immediate, because I think the knock-on impact is great. And so I think sometimes it's the courage to just know to do the right thing, and then we'll learn as we go that the measure can come. And I have another question here, if I may. Many projects don't have clear returns until year 4 or 5. And still, especially in nature-based solutions, the number of credits are often different than expected. What to do with these projects that do protect nature? Who would take the responsibility for those? I guess meaning who is taking the risk of the return profile, meaning the impact risk might be less than expected, and the duration risk might be longer than expected.
Well, depending on the project, it's a shared risk, really, and that's where you want to get to. So we spoke around blended finance. It's really a shared proportion of that risk and restructuring that risk-return profile, where we may have a multilateral development bank involved, the financier. I mentioned private credit earlier, working with insurers, really. And again, there's a lot of work being done with new product solutions from an insurance perspective that is looking at how you ensure sort of nature-positive or sustainable projects. So yes, I would say it's not just one concentrated risk, it's really shared risk across that and bringing those blended finance parties together to help, whether it's tenure, whether it's perhaps maybe project developers that are less known, maybe country risk, foreign risk, all of that can then be de-risked by multiple parties sharing.
I would simply say that it is a very important problem because the construction risk, or the initial stage, is much higher. We know that sometimes there is insurance, sometimes there's not. We recognize also that in terms of the carbon credit markets, that pays out once that project is in place. We're trying to see whether there are means to bringing that payment earlier on, when the funding is so much more important, that can cover that gap should there be one. It's not easy. Again, it's about incentives. How do you develop that effectively? But it is a gap that should be addressed. There are also ways of working with subsidies, which we've done a lot with PPPs in the past, that can also provide some upfront funding that comes from the latter revenues that come in. But it's not easy, and it's a very, very good question. Thank you.
Well, I think I'm supposed to leave here with optimism, and I am an eternal optimist. And I think the way that I would say I'm optimistic is because there's a lot of brain power here in different roles that is really thinking very creatively, but not in isolation, but in partnership. And with that, I feel we have hope that we will be able to identify, starting small, but also looking at ways that we could partner to continue to scale, to really address those system changes that is required. And I want to thank the panel for your insights, and I hope that we do walk away with hope that money will make things work, and then to drive the impact, but really focusing on there are multiple stakeholders in this nature, and planet is one of them, and we hope that we all have a bit of courage and patience and being part of this party to make this effectively a solution. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for moderating that. Towards the end of the day, we are almost there between you and your weekend or your Friday evenings with your family and friends.